So I have been covering the Hasselblad X2Dii Mark II camera since its launch, and I got it in my hands right now. And you've probably heard everything about the megapixels, the autofocus, the 35 to 100E lens, as well as the 10-stop IBIS. But today, I'm giving you 21 completely useless things that I've discovered about the Hasselblad X2Dii Mark II. Now, none of these is going to make you a better photographer, but you will never unsee some of these differences. If you are after a more serious list of things about the X2Dii Mark II, check out my other videos, which I'm going to be linking right up here, where I've covered the differences between the X2Dii Mark II as well as the original X2Dii Mark I in depth, the differences that actually matter. Now, today's video, none of these differences are going to make you a better photographer. So if you suck as a photographer like me in the first place, then the X2Dii Mark II is not going to make a difference. And I am sure today you will hear something that no other channel and no other YouTubers have covered. So just for disclaimer, I am not sponsored by Hasselblad. Hasselblad has not contacted me about making any of these videos at all. So I say what I want, and I paid for all these cameras and lenses using my own pocket money. So let's get straight into the 21 things that literally do not matter for the X2Dii Mark II, which is on the right here. First off, let's power it on. Alright, so first off, we want to talk about the shutter button. The shutter button on the X2Dii Mark II is no longer engraved as deeply as the Mark I. The scroll wheel is also mushier sounding. So this part here, if you can hear it, and on the original, so there's less click and more squish. Now the AEL and the AFD button, they have shifted slightly to the right, right? So if you look at the original Mark I, it is actually closer to the eyepiece than on the X2Dii Mark II. But you know, these two buttons, I rarely use them anyway. Now the buttons, they are also clickier. So listen to this. And on this, again. So the buttons are clickier on the X2Dii Mark II. The power button, there's less of an indent. In the older camera, you can feel it that the button is more recessed into the body, and on the Mark II, it is now flush with the body. Now, the new function here, the joystick, okay, it actually moves up and down, left and right, and it's clickable. So that's why they call it a 5D joystick. Now, note that it doesn't actually go diagonally. So if you want to go diagonally, you got to click left and up, or down and right, right? It doesn't go diagonally. Now, it's not a big deal, because if you want to move the focus point, then this is what you do. I mean, I much prefer this unless you're wearing gloves in winter or cold places and you cannot activate the touch screen. Otherwise, you can just use this, right? Rather than moving the joystick. Of course, the menu button, you can use the joystick, and I don't know why this is faster, but it is so much easier to actually navigate the menu using the touch screen. Now, next we want to talk about the build and the hardware. Now, if you notice the lens mount, this part here, the chamfering, there is less of a chamfering on the lens mount here, just some smaller semicircular indents at the top. And this one is more pronounced. Now, the same goes for the bottom of the camera as well. The indent is less. But you know what? The build-up mount, the lens mount, is now a lot sturdier. So this is the old camera. There's a little bit of play. And on the new X2Dii Mark II, oh well, there's still some little play, but it is a lot less obvious, especially with the bigger lenses. Now, the next useless piece of information is the screws, right? Now, if you remove this battery right here, And if you're able to go in, well, you can't see it, but there are screws in the battery compartment. Okay, let me show you why it matters. And these are the flaps. The screws that are being used are actually bigger screws than on the older camera. Not sure if you can pick that up on the camera, but yep, the screws, they are actually bigger on the X2Dii Mark II than the X2Dii Mark I. Does it matter to your photography? Absolutely not. Now, these flaps, okay, the hinge has got beefier springs. Right, this sounds better, it's more resistance, and there's just more satisfaction from the flaps. Now the whole camera is actually 0.5 mm taller. Let that sink in for a moment. I don't think you're going to be able to tell the difference at all, right? Because when I picked it out of my hand, it felt absolutely the same. Now the next thing we want to talk about, which is a very important change, is the screen design. Now, the screen has changed, right? So over here, you have the OLED screen, and here is the older non-OLED screen. Now, there are a few changes here. The screen is a lot more contrasty on the new OLED screen. The blacks are blacker, and because when you're navigating the menu, you want to pixel peep the menu, don't you? Now, the entire hinge is already redesigned. On the old camera, it used to be tethered at the top, right? Over here. So you cannot actually move the screen anywhere away because the screen is tethered at the top. On the new camera design, you can actually move it up and out, right? So it clears the eyepiece. So the tethering of the screen to the body is now at the bottom. So on the older camera, this one here, there are two tether points, right? One is at the bottom and the other one is at the top. So kind of like sturdy and it's not going to go anywhere. On the newer camera, I don't know, it's just one hinge here right now. Not sure whether that will last in the long run. Now, the other thing that you want to notice is that the data cables, right? You won't be able to catch that, but there are two data cables that are running from the body to the screen to relay information on the touchscreen. Now, if you can spot that, it is actually hidden just behind these two hinges here, rather beefy hinges. So here, there's only one data cable here, and they are actually exposed to the touch. So try not to mess around with them and try not to look at it then. On the older camera, you cannot actually see or access the data cable at all. Now, the little latch at the bottom of the screen, right, which is this part here, you will notice that the older one had a much bigger latch and this one has a much smaller latch. So why is it important? Because that is actually where you put your finger in to lift up the flap. So over on this one, the hinge, the flap here is the latch is smaller, right? So you have less of a grip. But on the top of the camera, you never had a latch here before, right? And now on this camera, you actually do get a small catch where you're able to flip the screen out. So for those of you who didn't know and want to flip the screen down, maybe last time what you were going to be doing was to flip it out and then move it down. But you don't have to, right? Because now the camera, you can just go to the top. There is a small catch and a small latch here. Now on a very, very tiny observation, the screen actually now sits a little bit further out from the body as opposed to the older screen. Now it gives the idea that actually the screen might be a little bit fatter, but it is not. Some small differences is the chamfering on the screen here is actually steeper, and here is actually shallower chamfering, right? So it feels and looks a tiny bit thicker. Now this is really interesting stuff. The screen, you will see it actually sits a lot further out from the body itself. The recess on the body is actually deeper on the old camera than on the new camera. So does this absolutely help you take better pictures? Well, only if you believe so. Now, next we want to talk about the port that is right here. Okay, no, I'm not talking about the 3.5mm cable release port. I'm talking about the USB-C port, which serves two functions. One is for charging and two is for data transfer. Let me explain to you what I have observed. Now, if you try to charge the older camera, okay, and I have a power bank with a meter readout right here. Let's try to charge the camera. Okay. Now you will notice that the camera is charging in at about 20 volts. So the PD protocol that's being deployed is 20 volt and is going in at just over half an amp. So this is for a total charging power of about 10-11 watts or so. Now using the same power bank and the same meter, let's move to this camera, the new one here. Now if I try to charge this, okay, let's see what the readout says. So it is charging at 12 volts instead of 20 volts. And it is charging at about 1.6, 1.7 amp, which gives it a charging power of close to 20 watts. So in terms of voltage draw, it's a lower voltage. Is at 12 volt, but it gives a lot more power. It's able to charge the camera much faster. Now, on the point of data transfer using the USB-C port, I have noticed that if you have a CF Express Type B card, right, on the camera here, which I've inserted here, when you connect this camera to the computer, you're able to read it as a storage device, right? So I've tested that out. The CF Express, when you're connected via USB-C port, the performance is roughly the same. It's not that fast, right? But when you are trying to read from the SSD on the X2Dii Mark II, it is significantly faster on the X2Dii Mark II. These two pieces of information regarding the USB-C port, it might actually be important information, not so much useless information, but on a day-to-day basis, if you are just transferring your photos via the Focus mobile app, then it probably doesn't matter as much on the cable, right? But if you are a real serious studio photographer and you're trying to transfer a large amount of data from the camera into your computer, then of course the USB-C port will matter. And that is a big jump in the speed when you're trying to transfer via USB for the SSD. So this is actually borderline useful, but I'll call it useless information anyway for some of us. Now on the cameras that I have mounted here, some lens, you will notice that I have the 28p that works with the X2Dii Mark II. Now on the X2Dii Mark I, I have the 45p that is being attached. Now, why am I attaching it this? Why not the 45p on the X2Dii Mark II camera? Now, this is the last piece of information I'm going to share with you, and it is actually monumental. It is actually a very important piece of information. If you're trying to use any of the more recent lenses, anything from the V series or the E series, or most of the P series, the 75 as well as the 28, it actually works on the X2Dii Mark II. But this lens here, right, if you look at the design, it's slightly dated anyway. So if I try to change the lens here, right, and I try to use the 45p on the new camera, let's see what happens, right? So, yeah. Okay, first let's look at this camera here. Now this one, it works, right, perfectly. That's fine. That's the 28p on the X2Dii Mark I. Now what happens on the X2Dii Mark II with the 45p lens? Well, it says lens issue. Please reconnect the lens. Okay, I've tried to reconnect the lens and it says no lens detected. So I did try to do a firmware update and it doesn't work at all. Why? Because it just isn't available for updating. So usually if there's a firmware update on the lens or the camera body, the Focus mobile app will actually tell you so, but there isn't an update for this camera, for this lens, when I'm trying to connecting it, right? So this is the firmware information, and you see, it doesn't even show the lens information at all. There's no firmware update for the 45p. So unfortunately, if you have the 45p, which is probably the most affordable lens in the Hasselblad lineup, it is not going to work. I mean, I don't really recommend the 45p anyway. The focusing is actually quite slow and noisy, and it's externally focusing. If you had just a little bit more money, I would suggest that you use the 28p. Of course, the focal length is going to be different. You're going to get a much wider field of view. The closest to the 45p will either be the 38V or the 55V, which costs significantly much more. So if you're trying to wait for the 35 to 100 lens and you want to find a cheap lens to get by in the meantime while waiting, then I'll recommend the 28p. So you see, this is actually very important. Some people saying that the 45p is not supported for AFC, but on the camera, it literally says that there's no lens detected. So forget about continuous AF. It doesn't even take a picture at all. So this is literally Hasselblad's way of ghosting you if you have an older lens on the camera body. In other words, you're screwed. Okay, so that is the end of today's very interesting video on 2021 pieces of useless information for the X2Dii Mark II. Now, if you want more videos like this, or if this video has helped you, please help support the channel by clicking on subscribe, ringing the notification bell, and leaving a comment on this video if it has helped you in any way. There is a super thanks, super like button right there at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to contribute to channel building, then that is your way of doing so. In the meantime, check out my other videos right here, and I will see you in one of those videos.